Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 41. We've renamed the podcast, and it's now the Focus on Gaming podcast. So, welcome to Gary Bracey, a legend of Ocean Software and many other projects, which we'll get into. But welcome, Gary.
Nice to have you on. Very much. Delighted to be here, Tom. Thanks for asking me.
And welcome, Duncan, of course.
Hello, I'm here as well, yes.
But unfortunately, Martin's not with us today because he's stuck in traffic. So, but he'll be back next week. So as I said, welcome, Gary, to the podcast. And we've got a number of questions for you, but it'd be interesting to have your take on you as a gaming industry legend. So can you tell us just a brief overview of your history in gaming?
I hate using that term. It always makes me uncomfortable. Well, I started in the heyday of computer games, I guess. I had my own little retail shop in Liverpool. I knew John Woods and David Ward, actually, personally, who recently started a company called Spectrum Games, which became Ocean. They were great marketeers and businessmen, but they didn't know an awful lot about computer games. They wanted someone in who did. And because I sold them, I was then an expert. So I came on board as software manager. They asked me to look after the development. Most of the development was being undertaken those days by freelance bedroom programmers all over the country, in Brighton and goodness knows where. They did have a small in-house team, and the quality stuff was coming from the in-house team, the likes of David Collier and Joffa, Brian Buchan, etc. But all the stuff that was being done freelance was dross. It was terrible if it was being done at all. So I took the view of maybe the way to go is to expand the in-house team, and we did that. And in fairness to David and John, they showed a leap of faith and let me indulge with that. So went on a big recruitment drive and sourced amazing talent. The likes. I hate mentioning names because if I mention names, then I inevitably means I leave some out, and I don't like doing that. But in those days, the likes of Simon Butler and Mike Lamb and Dawn Drake and John Megan and there were so many, John Bramwood, and we built up this amazing team of talent who I considered to be the best in the world at creation, at design, at development, programming. The musicians, the likes of Martin Galway, who was already there, but John Dunn, who came shortly afterwards, and Barry Leach. I mean, these were incredible talents. The artists, we were just blessed with great talent. And
they really did transform the industry in a lot of ways.
I think we were the first big studio. This is before the days of EA and things like that. And there was no set technique for how things were done, how you develop games, because traditionally games were being developed in bedrooms by one programmer and one artist. And it was very, very rare to have a studio.
Yeah.
And we were the first major publisher studio in the world. And it sort of took off from there, and I think that goes towards the quality of the talent that we had, goes towards the success that the company enjoyed, I believe.
I think E.T., I think famously, the person was told, no, it was one person, they were told 5 weeks. They had to get E.T. out for the Atari and whatnot. So
we had a couple of similar situations, like not as extreme, but we had a couple of clunkers like that. I mean, you're not going to have a spotless record, but as long as you have a reasonable hit rate, then you keep the faith, I guess.
I think one of my guilty pleasures for Ocean Software was Terminator 2. And I know it doesn't have always the best rep for a game, but I kind of enjoy it a lot, especially the Amstrad version.
Yeah, proud of that one.
Sorry, Duncan, carry on.
So, were you a gamer before? What was the first game that you ever remember playing?
Probably, I know it's a tired old trope, Manic Miner. I mean, the thing was that I was in Liverpool. I'm in Liverpool now, actually, visiting family, but I'm from Liverpool, and we had a great industry in Liverpool with the likes of Bug Bite and Imagine, and I knew the guys there. I mean, I was in clothing at the time, menswear, and I remember going to Bug Bite and Imagine with my samples of shirts and etc., and trading them for computer games for my Spectrum. And I got friendly with the Matthew Smiths of this world and everyone else. And I remember when Jet Set Willy was launched, and this is before I got proper into the industry myself, I was helping Software Project out, packing cassette boxes into packs to be shipped out to the various games companies and game shops. And Matthew Smith himself was there, putting cassettes in boxes. We were all there, all hands on deck.
It's almost like the gamer version of hanging around with Andy Warhol kind of thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean those were heady days, and it was the very, very beginning of the industry as we now know it, and things have changed dramatically. But I truly believe that the 80s and early 90s were just magical years to be involved in that industry. It was the birth of the industry. I call it the rock and roll years, and it was truly amazing. Yeah.
And what was it like working with the different methods of getting the license and then taking it from the programmers to the distribution? I mean, what was that era like?
It was wonderful. I mean, my big thing was movies. I loved movies. So I used to read all the script. I just gorged myself on every script that came through. And by and large, because they weren't the completed movies, they were just from script, we had to make decisions on whether the script, the actors and the directors were good enough to potentially make a good genre movie that we could make a game from. And then what we do is we take sections of the script of the story and say, okay, we can adapt that into an interactive version of the game. Hence, in Untouchables, you have the pram going down the stairs and you've got to protect the pram, the baby carriage, and all those. And that's why we came up with, and again, I think we were quite innovative in this way. We came up with multi-section games for the movies, like Platoon, I think was probably the first one, where it wasn't just a platform game or a shoot 'em up. The game was divided into different types of sections. Robocop was another, and I think we got known for that, and it was great fun. Probably the most successful of all was Batman commercially, Batman the movie. So I think we got that part right, and no one else really did that, I don't believe.
Did you ever find yourself like with any sort of celebrities where you were like, oh my God, did you actually meet them, or was it all remote?
My career is a massive wonderland of that, and I met everyone. I had a meeting with Steve Jobs. I had a creative meeting on Jurassic Park with Steven Spielberg. I was on the set of Hook with Robin Williams and Dustin Hoffman, and we were drinking, we were chatting. I mean, I was very, very fortunate. I remember, funnily enough, when I've been thinking about my celebrity meets, and truly, I met many, 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 many celebrities. But one that stuck out in my mind, one day, I went to this agent's office and he'd arranged 2 meetings. And the first one was with a chap called James Clavell, who at the time was a massive author, and he wrote books, Shogun and something else, but they were all about samurai warriors and whatnot. And he was a really smart guy, and he said something to me which has always remained with me. He said, he introduced himself, and I introduced myself, Gary Bracey, nice to meet you. He said, Bracey, that's an interesting name. He said, I'll make a note of that. I must use that in one of my books as for one of my characters. And you go, wow, this is great. So, of course, when his next books came out, I bought them. Then I realized he must say that to absolutely everybody. And everyone would buy his books from then on. I thought that was genius. And I don't think Abrasi has ever appeared in any of his books. But the second one that day was a band who'd just got famous. They bought a boat and they were going to enter in a boat race. And it was Duran Duran. And they loved video games. So we had a meeting with them to notionally create a game based on their boat, which was called Drum. And had a whole afternoon meeting with them. And then Yasmin walked in and I was blown away because she had something else.
Stunning.
Yes. It was amazing. And those things, and I've only remembered those meetings recently. I've never spoken about them before. But I had... Yeah. I mean, it really was. I say it was the rock and roll days. I was very lucky because I was spending 2 weeks out of 6 in Hollywood because I was on the film sets. And, sitting with Tim Burton going through the daily rushes, Batman. You asked me the question. I'm not deliberately name dropping, but...
No.
It's a question I could spend all day answering.
Did you ever just sit there and go, what am I doing here?
No, I actually appreciated every second. And when it all finished and when I went on to a proper job, people used to say to me, oh, don't you miss that? And I say, absolutely not. I'm just so grateful that I got the chance to do it in the first place. And there were other things, unrelated things. I remember being at this bar in... I think it was on Sunset Hollywood Boulevard, and Richard Pryor walked. And Richard Pryor was one of my biggest influences. He was a god to me. But it was the time he was wasting away, and he had MS, and he was very, very frail. And he just plonked himself next to me by coincidence, and we struck up a chat. And he was amazing. And that was a pinch me moment, actually. And they say never meet your heroes, but that was one I was happy to meet. And it was just
lived up to it.
Wow, that's
yeah. So was there ever a license or a game that got away that you really wanted, and either you got the license and it was made and not released, or just simply got away?
Yeah, I think it got very competitive. Once movie licenses for games had established themselves and they became money spinners, then obviously there was a fight. And I recall Acclaim was a big competitor of ours. And what was interesting is Acclaim got The Simpsons. And I remember everyone being quite upset that we didn't nab it. It was quite expensive. But I also recall, because I spent so much time out in the States at the time, I remember bringing this show and presenting it to the directors of the company, the fellow directors, and saying, this is a cartoon, I know, but it's getting a lot of support, a lot of traction, and it's going to be big and it's worth getting. And no one was interested, and that was The Simpsons. And then 2 years later, the license was picked up for a ridiculous amount of money. That was sort of got away, but not from me. It got away from everyone else.
I think we interviewed Bill Harbison a couple of months ago, and I can't remember who he said that did it, but he said that somebody didn't have something to do one afternoon, so knocked up a prototype for a Simpsons isometric game, and that was the kind of thing they did.
Yes, I'm bored. I'll write a game. No, exactly. We did. I mean, Bill was an exceptional talent, along with the others I was talking about, and they would come up because the artists were also the design. We didn't have back then. I mean, later on we did, but back then we didn't have games designers. Mostly it was the artists and the collaboration with the programmers who came up with the design of the games. It was sort of very much a collaborative effort. Whereas these days you've got designers and that's exactly what they do. But we were making it up as we went along. Yeah. There was no rule book.
Excellent.
I think there was personality in the games back then as well, whereas now it's they're almost quite generic. They lose that.
It's funny you say that. Yeah, it's funny you say that because I bemoan the fact that there's very little innovation in terms of design. in terms of games concept, and we got some new, fresh stuff when mobile phones came out, but that was by virtue of the interface being swipe touch, which had to replace, obviously, the joystick. So the game mechanics had to adapt to suit those interfaces, and that's fine. But as far as I'm concerned, with a few exceptions, the last truly innovative game was Tomb Raider, which was the first really immersive 3D game. I mean, you had Doom and stuff, but Tomb Raider on the PlayStation really broke boundaries there and gave you a proper 3D perspective, excuse the pun. And since then, there's been, Portal. Amazing original game. But they've been really few and far between. There's been some great games, and I particularly love the Bethesda stuff, the Skyrim, Fallouts, and all those. But they are, if I may say, derivative. They're the best in their genre, but they're still conceptually as games. There is very little true innovation, and that's something I find really sad.
Yeah, hopefully we'll see a change in that as now we're going back to the handheld gaming. Hopefully we'll get a lot of more independents coming on board to reinvent. That would be good. So
I hope so.
Yeah,
Duncan.
Next question, Tom.
Go on. Do it if you wish.
Yes, you go ahead.
How did the Hit Squad releases come about? Personally, I collect Hit Squad, and I think about 25 titles, but it's definitely harder to come by some of the releases now on the Hit Squad, and the prices are going up and up. But how did that come about from the original release to bringing things over? Was there any licensing issues or?
No, there weren't. I think it was the second bite of the cherry. I mean, I think the core of the Hit Squad initiative was David Ward, and he saw the likes of Telecom Soft and Mastertronics making a lot of money from these budget games, and we weren't in the market of writing, publishing budget games. But what we did have was this growing back catalogue, which had lived their lives, and why not? Re-release them under a budget label, and the Hit Squad was born, and then we had the compilations. They sold 1 million and all that. It was just a business issue, and it worked very, very well.
Yeah. So, and in fact, some of those now, are reaching £200 for one cassette.
Seriously?
Yeah. Some of the Hit Squad games are crazy pricing.
That's mad.
More so than the original releases.
There was no one in Ocean at the time who kept copies of there was no Ocean museum or storage. No one thought about keeping copies of the games, and we had no showcase with all the games, and there was nothing like that. I think Mark Jones took it upon himself a few years back to start amassing that collection. And it's a lot of games when you consider, because it's not just, we were quite prolific in terms of what we produced title-wise, but you've also got to remember each title was published over many formats and some disc and cassette. So, it wasn't uncommon to have one title and 8 or 9 releases from that one title.
Yeah.
So what do you consider the best or the greatest platform that you released on?
Obviously I've been involved right up to recently. So I loved all the consoles and everything, but I think in terms of fun and challenge, I loved the 16-bit stuff, the Amiga days, because they allowed us to jump from a really pixelated Spectrum 8-bit display to something that was approaching what we thought at the time was a realistic look. I'm very, very proud of Batman the movie I mentioned before as one game that really, really did justice to the format. So it's difficult to say which format. Obviously, I have a love of the Spectrum because that's the one I first cut my teeth on. affection for Commodore 64, not so much for the format, but the likes of Sensible Software pretty much exclusively developed their games on the 64, which gave me an affinity to that format, which I didn't really have before. And then the 16 bits came along, and DID came along, and they did all those flight sims and everything else, and they were extraordinary. So I think it's all about the era. You know, I would look back in terms of the eras and what were the popular platforms. And then, of course, when the consoles came along, that was a game changer, excuse the pun. And we obviously got involved with the Nintendo, and consoles seemed to be the future and the way it was going, although PC obviously never really disappeared. And you know, PlayStation was extraordinary. It was 3D, which we'd never really had properly before, and the derivatives and the sequels from that. And then, you know, the internet just changed everything in terms of multiplayer. So, you know, you can categorize. And then the handhelds, of course, going from Game Boy right up to mobile phones these days and everything in between. It's just become an extraordinary collection of eras rather than genres. It's what was right in the era, and it's difficult. It's Sophie's choice. You're asking me to choose my favorite child.
Like choose your favorite child, isn't it?
I mean, I find that the 8-bit, that what amazes me is not necessarily the games, because, you know, I was very much a small child in the 80s, playing the, you know, what games my parents would allow me to buy. But it's just now I look back on them, and the technical ability to get something that, in terms of data, is less than a picture that my phone takes now. In fact, a lot less than a picture that my phone takes. And the fact that you say about the different genres in each game, the technical ability, and to get all the art with so little colours, and it was amazing. And Ocean were the ones. They were the ones that had the impressive games, the big name, the big movies.
We tried. As I say, we didn't have 100% record, but we were up there, and there was a lot we were very, very proud of, and I think justifiably.
Yeah, absolutely. Fully agree. So what are your thoughts on gaming today? I know you've mentioned about the types of games, and we spoke about that, but things like they're talking about metaverse and VR, and obviously you've got Steam Decks and things like that. What are your thoughts on where things are now, system-wise?
I think it's time for a sea change. I mean, I was latterly, before I retired, which was a couple of years ago, I was involved in the whole metaverse type thing and brainstorming with a company called Terra Virtua, which I co-founded. And we were coming up with concepts and ideas that I think have legs, and you know, you will be in an environment. It's Ready Player One, basically, and maybe not quite as immersive, not for quite a while, as Ready Player One, but in terms of having various games at your fingertips and then merging with each other, and you are able to drive a racing car from one game into another game and sort of get out the car and then pick up your gun and you're in Call of Duty or Fallout or whatever. I think there's an awful lot to be said. The problem and the limitation is not in the technology at all. All the technology can serve all of this. It's for the games companies to be able to play nicely with each other, and they won't do that at the moment. And there was one of the things I was trying to do at the time was saying, okay, well, if you could buy a gun in Call of Duty and use it in Fallout, I keep using the same names, but using those guns in Fallout and vice versa, and talking to Activision, they said, well, you know, why should we allow people to buy guns in Fallout and use them in Call of Duty? How do we earn money from that? And well, apart from the obvious, it opens it up and you bring more people into your game. My solution off the top of my head was you sell ammunition. So you don't have to sell the gun, but you can sell the ammunition. So they can only use that gun if they buy the ammunition in your game. So there are creative ways of addressing these problems. But at the moment, they like the fact that their games are ring fenced, and it's the Apple mentality, which I'm not a good fan of. So, I don't like that. And only once those barriers are lowered, and I think we might be getting a hint of that now with the talk of Microsoft allowing some of the games to be published on PlayStation platforms, some of their exclusives. Yeah. So that could be the start or the hint of something like that happening. I hope so.
Yeah, it would be good. Definitely.
Yeah, I think we've got things like Epic are trying their own sort of bringing in various games into one, where you've got their racing, Lego Fortnite yes. and all that. But again, they're arguing with Apple, and then Apple are arguing with Google, and it's all very much they want to get on, but it's all about who makes the money.
Yes,
and they all.
It's interesting now that Disney have invested in Fortnite, and Disney are invested in Apple.
Yes.
So I think you're right. I think we'll see those doors opening and that universe expanding into other areas.
And they've got to embrace the indies as well, because it's the indies who will bring the innovation. The big companies play it safe. The indies don't, and they're the innovative ones. So hopefully we'll see a big change over the coming years. And then you've got these things potentially on the sideline, like VR and AR, which can also contribute and again create groundbreaking new dynamics and mechanics in games. And if you put all of this together, the future for gaming could be extraordinary. But it means that there needs to be a lot more collaboration than there is at the moment.
I agree. One question I'd like to ask you is has a two-part question. And I just thought of it while we were talking. Will there ever be a Gary Bracey book about the Ocean Software days? And secondly, will we ever see an Ocean Software compilation release linked to some of the old games on the Evercade or Steam store or something like that?
To answer your first question, I think porn is totally accessible now anyway, so why would anyone? No, there will never be a Gary. Thank you for asking, but I toyed with the idea of writing the book, but there's stuff that I couldn't include, and could be libelous and whatever, and be sued. So no, unfortunately, we're just going to have to depend on lovely interviews like this, where I can sort of reach into the recesses of my memory and bring out a nugget or two. But it's no, sadly not. But I've contributed to some books. There was a Sensible Software book. There was an Ocean book, of course. And I've contributed when asked. I'll happily do it, but as the years go on, it does get more and more difficult to remember. And I mentioned the Duran Duran and James Clavell thing to you, and that just popped into my head about a week ago, and I don't recall ever talking about that to anyone before. And I've still got a book, The Drum was the name of the boat, the Duran Duran boat, and I've still got a book that they signed for me, and it was quite amazing. So no, there will be. The second question, I think that's going to be very difficult. I did endeavor at a certain time to see if I could get back the Ocean back catalogue with that very thing in mind of adapting a lot of the games and perhaps releasing them on mobile or whatever. And I don't think it will ever happen.
Licensing?
Well, the people who own the Ocean brand and IP don't know what they have. And so it's difficult, I think, logistically, and it's probably not worth their while. When I got into a conversation with a lawyer, and I think it was the time Atari had the Ocean IP, basically it wasn't worth their while to investigate what they had, whether they had to, because of course they'd have to, if we're talking about the movie licenses, they'd have to renew the licenses as well, which would there would be a cost, and it just wasn't viable for them to do it.
Yeah. So, and there's so much there that could be
so much, but not a huge amount of original stuff. I mean, you had the likes of the Sensible, the DID, the John Rippon stuff. Again, I don't want to miss anyone up, but we had a lot of original games that I was proud of. But I don't know that. I'll tell you what was a great one that I always thought would be wonderfully on console was the Ant game. I've forgotten what it was called. Pushover.
Yes,
I was playing that on. It's on Steam.
Is it really?
It is on Steam, and I played that about a month ago.
It's a great game.
Sponsored by Quavers.
That's right. Yes, we did a deal. There was a chap called Daniel Bobroff, and we were bringing adverts into games. It was that was groundbreaking in itself. So we brought brands and IP into games, and they sponsored them. And basically, Quavers would pretty much cover the cost of development, and everything else was bunt. It was
it's a fantastic puzzle game.
It is very clever.
I could still find there were still level codes available on the internet. So it was brilliant. I loved it. And it had full motion cartoon kind of.
Yes. Well, Simon Butler designed the ant on that, and GI Ant Giant, and it was really good. It was clever.
It was a really good game.
Right. I think last question, Tom.
Yeah. So I'm going to change the way we were asking this question. How would you like your era in gaming, your impact on the industry to be remembered by future generations?
If it is remembered, I don't know. I mean, it's very difficult to answer that because it would come out as arrogant if I wish fulfillment and all that.
Feel free.
I think we'd like to be known, and I say we, everyone who was involved with Ocean in those days, as, if I could be so bold as to say, pioneering. I'd like to think we did set the bar in certain ways for the way games are produced, the way games are acquired, the way IP is acquired and designed. And a lot of what we did, we set a template for which is still being used today. I mean, back then you'd have 2 or 3 people writing a game. Now it's 2,000 or 3,000, so a slight difference. But I don't know. I think the greatest thrill for me is that people still look back fondly on those games. They see it as an intrinsic part of their childhood. And knowing that I was a small part of that is enough. It really is. And people look back with affection and nostalgia, and to have contributed some of that is enough, really.
Yeah, that's what I think. My kids literally about a month ago completed RoboCop.
Oh, really?
And, I've got a 14-year-old and a 12-year-old, and they sat there together doing the levels and completed it. I never completed it when I was a kid.
Well, that's amazing, because going back to those games, they are so much more difficult than you remember. They are not easy. And I mean, going back from Manic Miner right through, very, very difficult to complete a lot of those games. So if your kids completed RoboCop, good on them.
I saw that first screen on Manic Miner thousands of times. So,
yeah, you always got to get it pixel perfect, the jump. No, it was wonderful. And unfortunately, I have to go, but I'll leave you one thing. There is another celebrity I met, and this is a lovely segue for you, which was Mr. Sugar. And we had a meeting, and if you've got kids listening, you may want to switch this off or mute it. But we had a meeting in which he was introducing, he was doing a cartridge version, because the Nintendo was sneaking up there and cartridge was becoming the thing of the future. And he'd created this cartridge version of the CPC and wanted us to support it. So we went over there and he presented it. And he was just like he is with the Apprentice. You can fucking do this. And it was, and we were all there in suits and trying to be very proper. And he's, you do this, you do that, and you make your fucking games on these. You can cut this bit out if you need. But that was our.
That's right. We can tick the explicit box.
But that was back then, and everyone was quite prim and proper in those days. And here we had, a leader of industry, just giving it to us straight. And we came away, and I remember, it wasn't just me and some of the other directors. We had a lot of our creative guys in this meeting as well, because they wanted to see what the potential was, and they all came away saying, I don't want to do anything for that guy. We're not inspired by it at all.
Or threatened.
Especially with the machine as well. I mean, the GX4000 was dreadful.
GX4000, that was it, So, we didn't. I think we may have done, one or two, because we'd done well with Amstrad before, and we had a lot of affection for the machine. And some of our best versions of games, Renegade perhaps being one of them, was the best version was on the Amstrad.
So
it was.
But we could talk to you for hours. I think you have. But look at the time. We have got to go. It has been. I can speak personally. I think Tom will say the same thing. It has been an absolute privilege and interesting beyond belief to talk to you. Thank you ever so much.
Well, thanks for
part of my childhood, and you were the one interview that I said I wanted on here. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for it. I always find it flattering, and I really am humbled that you asked me. So it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for allowing me to unburden some of my dim and distant memories. And best of luck with the podcast and the rebranding.
Yes, that's it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
So thank you to Gary Bracey for that fantastic interview. And Gary touched upon the Amstrad, which is the 40th anniversary of the Amstrad 464, the CPC 464, which was released in 1983. Believe it or not, a long time ago. When it was released, it came with the Amsoft.
Just correct you. It is 1984, is it? Because it's 2024.
Yes. Yes, that's true. But it came with some Amsoft software, so it had pre-populated software within the box. And you had a choice between the green screen monitor or the color monitor, and you had the colorful keyboard with the cassette deck that was part of the structure of the machine. A lot of the games with green screen, particularly Simpsons, as Gary mentioned, you couldn't see the homework sheets that were flying around in the street on the first level. So if you had a green screen monitor, you weren't completing the game or getting past the first level. So
oh dear,
I know.
Oh dear.
But we moved on.
I'm guessing if you wanted to game, you pretty much had to buy the colour one anyway. Really, I remember trying to game on an old PC when 5.25-inch discs and on a green screen once, and it was not a nice experience.
Well, it was the cut price model of the CPC, that's why. So if you didn't have a lot of money, that you got the green screen. So, but there was the modulator, which allowed you to connect it to a TV as well. So you could buy this add-on. And they were like the printers and various other things, and the floppy disk, or not the floppy disk, it was the old magnet style disk system that we could plug into the back, which was easy to erase. You just had to leave it near something electronic for too long, and it was over. So, but obviously, Alan
good quality Amstrad products as usual.
Yeah.
But that was a general thing with the technology of the day, wasn't it? If you had magnets near anything or any kind of electrical signals going near anything else, it would. That was it. It was gone, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, Amstrad would release their Christmas special, their Christmas product for the year, and everyone would wait to see what this cut price new thing would be. So it went from hi-fis to the Amstrad emailer and all things like that, and the Amstrad CPC was meant to be the Christmas special. But obviously, with that, they didn't think about you need software and that's how Amsoft came about with like Rolling on the Ropes and Oh Mummy and Harrier Attack and things like that from Jarrell Software. And there was so many games, and some of the games were absolutely fantastic, but then some were absolutely dreadful, like Animal, Vegetable, Mineral. Don't ask. So, yeah.
What did it just go? Tree. Animal.
Yeah, basically. Yeah.
Oh
yeah.
God.
It was a word association game, I guess you'd call it. But yeah, I mean, that's a fantastic stuff. Yeah.
So. I've got to say, I think we chatted a little bit before. I don't know much about the Amstrad, and I'll tell you how I saw and probably still see Amstrad a bit. I see the Spectrum as the people who couldn't quite afford the Commodore 64, and the people who had the Commodore 64 if wouldn't have wanted an Amstrad. Yeah, and I just think it was the middle of the road.
It was device. The poor cousin at the time.
It was the poor cousin of the C64, and it was the expensive version of the Spectrum. And so that's why it was third place, wasn't it, really?
It was, apart from in Spain and France, where it was the leader of the pack. But in fact, I think it was France, or was it Spain, that had a slightly different model, because there was some legality around the type of memory that was allowed in the machine. And without going into too much detail, they managed to get away with adding this extra bit of memory in and releasing it out there. But yeah, to give you an idea, the introductory price of the green screen monitor and system was $199. So this is back in.
Okay, so it wasn't. I think the Spectrum was in the hundreds something, wasn't it?
Yeah, and then the color screen was $299. So, and it sold 2 million.
See now. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't a terrible machine, and it had some positives. I'm not saying it was a dreadful machine. I just remember it back in the 80s. You had all the kids who were C64 owners were like, yeah, we've got money kind of thing. And then you had all the Spectrum ones going, yeah, but everybody makes games for us. We've got more games. And then you had the CPC owners that were like, I've got a computer.
Can I have some more?
Yeah, they were sort of trying to hang around with all of us going, yeah, I've got a computer.
Yeah, it was. It's funny because the CPC was designed to be very similar to the BBC Micro, where it was you had all the manuals. In fact, it had some of the most detailed manuals, particularly when it went up to the 6128. So you could learn to program, and a lot of parents would. Not only was it cost effective, but they would buy it because it had all this stuff where their kids could learn to program and make their own games. Of course, most kids weren't doing their homework and making their own games. They were playing games that their parents bought, such as RoboCop and Platoon and all sorts of
that. Just looking through the photos, because I only remembered the one with the colours buttons, which was the 464, yes?
Yeah.
And then they made the 6128, is it? Yep, 6128.
Yeah.
And it's grey.
Yep.
So it's like, yay, we got one, and it looks really colourful and nice and everything. I'm presuming that they were going for a more professional look or something like that. But it's like, can I get this weaker one or this more powerful one? The more powerful one looks boring.
I think it was a case of they need to target a more professional audience, but also so much money was put into expanding the technical side of it that it was cheaper to produce the grayscale packaging. So,
let's face it, I think we all know Alan Sugar. Alan Sugar, for those that are in other countries, who owns Amstrad, presents the British version of The Apprentice, which obviously we know the person who presented the American version of that. We don't want to talk about him. So he's very much all about the profit and whatnot. So yeah, I can totally see that. And I think looking at their later models, their home PCs and everything, they definitely decided that the home gaming market was not for them. I think they tried with their console. They had a console version, didn't they?
It did, yeah, the GX 4000. which was essentially
how did that go?
Well, they said it was comparable to some of the later consoles moving into the 16-bit era, but essentially it was an 8-bit gaming machine. So it was had more colors. If I remember right, the color palette was better and the sound chip was good, but it wasn't a great machine. So yeah, but they did then partner with Sega and release a PC that had a slot for Mega Drive games.
Which was, okay,
pretty good. So yeah, it has a legacy, and I think Alan Sugar's recently bought back the Amstrad name, which he's gifting to his son. It's now Amstrad Digital, if I remember rightly. So there is the potential we may see.
I just looked up. It was the Amstrad Mega PC.
That's the one. Yeah,
it was released in 1993 under license from Sega.
Yeah,
it was
so
similar.
Maybe we'll see an Amstrad Mini at some stage. I think there's a market for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think like Gary was saying, it's not the licensing; it's who owns these games.
Yeah.
And I think from 40 years ago, or even 35 years ago, nowadays you've got lawyers own games, you've got finance companies own games, and they own them because they've bought out the name license. They bought a company's assets and then sold them all off and just gone, oh, this is a game from 1986. Nobody wants that. And unless it's a big game, that speaks to them, I think they just wipe them off. And like you said, you have to pay for movie ones or sound. You have to pay royalties and all this kind of thing. And once they've done that, it can only be from an act of love for the game rather than for profit. And unfortunately, a lot of the people that own these things are just out for the profit, and it's not worth the effort. Your retro fans are not, unfortunately, the people who own these things.
That's true. Well, we've got Harrier Attack, which was one of the original Amsoft games, was re-released on Android probably 2-3 years ago. I could be wrong on the date, but
okay.
And it's been upgraded. It's Durrell Software, I believe, did the release, but it's fantastic, and it's
not one of these side-scrolling things where you have to dodge missiles and there's tanks shooting at you, and then you have to drop bombs and whatnot. Yeah.
It's really hard. The original was really hard. Obviously, you could learn the patterns of the game because it didn't really deviate too much, but it was a fantastic game. I think it was about 7 levels, so it was quite easy to complete if you could memorize the patterns of the game. You had Soltaire's Maze was another one, and Thundercats, and there was loads of like BBC and ITV, or was it Channel 3 TV licensing, like Super Ted and Trapdoor. And like that.
I loved Super Ted and Spotty.
Yeah, fantastic.
So now I'm looking here. I'm looking at Wikipedia, as you know, the authoritative bit of information. It's got under Amstrad, Sinclair ZX Spectrum 2 plus 2 and plus 3. So the tape and the disc version.
So essentially, Amstrad bought out Spectrum. They
what?
Bought out they bought out the brand, and they replicated the Amstrad CPC 464. It expanded some of the inners and released this mid-range
the plus Spectrum
2.
So the plus 2, for those that don't know, was the tape deck one, that built-in tape deck. Which the 464 did have a tape deck built in from day one, didn't it?
It did.
And then the plus 3 was a disc. I don't think were they 5 1/4 inch discs, but they were.
That's the one. When they were magnetic discs or something.
I can't remember. It was a 3-inch. They were 3-inch discs, but they were similar to the 5 1/4 inch discs. They were literally floppy. If you bent them, they bent. they were not like your 3 1/4 inch ones that you could bang on the desk kind of thing, and that you used in the Commodore Amiga and Atari ST and PCs.
But it had better specs than CPC, but it was a brand worth buying, and somehow these arch enemies came to some agreement, and yeah.
Well, if they owned it, you would have did whatever they. I presume that Clive Sinclair was probably not part of that sale, because
I think he was moving on at the time.
He went on to what was the bike thing?
The C5, wasn't it?
The C5, Sinclair C5. Yeah. Maybe he was off to create that success.
Yeah. I think it was.
Rest his soul. Yeah. He was an amazing innovator, but not the best businessman, I don't think.
No. Well, Amstrad buried Spectrum quite quickly after that initial release. I think there was a couple more machines, and then they buried the brand quite quickly. So, game-wise, it was still supported, to my knowledge. So, but there were limitations on the Spectrum, particularly the first two. The massive limitations. The Amstrad had more color. The colors were more available. But technically,
64 kilobytes of RAM. The 464, and then obviously the 6128 had 128 kilobytes of RAM, which obviously there was the Spectrum 128K, which I think because things were developed for the 48K mostly, I don't think things really took advantage of that.
No.
But obviously, they had 64 kilobytes. It is just weird to speak about it though, because even 64 kilobytes. I mean, you're talking nowadays a document. That's a document size extra.
Yeah, yeah.
And yet this was the difference between having more colours or more sprites on the screen, or a different mode or something. And yeah, it's just amazing. The technology behind the 8-bit era was absolutely amazing. Yeah.
It was, and it still has legacy today. I mean, you only have to look at some of the prices on eBay and what these things are going for, and I don't think there's anyone, to my knowledge, that has a complete Amstrad or Spectrum collection. I think it's one of those things that people collect for, but there's no end to that collection because there were so many different games and independent veteran developers, and yeah, it was just endless. So you could never truly get a full.
No, I think official games. I think there are a lot available, but then again, they're on tapes, so they're always they've got to be backed up. I think nowadays, because tapes, even if they've been stored very well and in a dry atmosphere, there's chances they could have disintegrated, kind of thing. But yeah, like you said, they'll never. There was hundreds and hundreds of games. You go to a game shop, and there would be all sorts of walls of games from this country, from other countries, that were ones you'd heard of, and then you had value games where they'd be. I think they used to be 99p. Because games were generally about between £5 and £8 kind of thing. I think I remember games being.
I remember my mum paying £9.99 for RoboCop, and
maybe that much. But then but then value games you could get. There was various ranges. Yeah, there would be 99p or you'd like the Hit Squad. You'd pay £5, and you'd get 20 games on the tape. But then you'd have to find the game on the tape.
That was the problem. I mean, you had the Hit Squad game where you had the one game and you could pay $1.99 for the singular game, or like you say, like 10 games in one pack for the ultimate. The LA collection, CPC collection promotion software that had 15 games, from Top Gun to Batman to Kung Fu fighting and match point tennis and Rambo. So, and they were fantastic, but you'd have multiple cassettes in there that you'd have to figure out where the game was.
I had one of the best compilations I ever had was Spectrum. It wasn't Amstrad. Was actually the Live Aid, Band-Aid, whatever they called it. And they released a game compilation. Now, I can't remember the games. I remember there being Live Aid game compilation. Sorry, I'm just going to look this up quickly. and let's see, I can't find it. Live Aid, because it had a do they at the beginning of the tape there was do they know it's Christmas, and then there was about 10 games on it. I think it was on one tape, so you just had to turn it over to find. It was brilliant. I can't remember the games that were on it. They were all, I think, what you'd probably call indie games nowadays. Game tape. Let's have a look. The TT Spectrum. No, I just can't find it. I can't find it. There was definitely a one. I'll have to look that up. But yeah, there was RC Pro Am. I think was on it.
Oh, maybe. Good game. Yeah.
I think maybe that or something very similar. Probably a knockoff. But yeah, the compilations were funny, and kids now will never know the frustration of starting a game, trying to find a game. No, I don't want to play that one because you didn't know which game it was.
No,
when you started loading up, you'd be like,
loaded.
"Hang on, I think this is it," because you'd have to fast forward, but you wouldn't know if you'd fast forwarded too far. So you just find the end and where there was a gap, start playing, and it would load up the game, and you'd be like, it's the wrong game. And then you'd have to go, right, it's 2 more games on. So you'd have to fast forward again, load up another game. And these games would take 4 or 5 minutes to load up sometimes.
Would. Yeah. Then the tape would be dusty and you get an error or something like that and you start all over again. Interestingly, I just found the variation of the Spanish variation I mentioned earlier. It was called the CPC 472. It was essentially a 464. So in August of 1985, Spain briefly introduced an import tax of 15,000 pesetas,
that was a tax dodge.
90 euros, on computers containing 64 kilobyte or less of RAM. The new law mandated that all computers sold also had to have a Spanish keyboard. So to circumvent this, Amstrad Spanish distributor Instacomp, who became Amstrad Spain, created and distributed the CPC 472 with a modified version of the 464. Its main difference was an additional daughter board containing the CPC 664 ROM chip with 8 kilobyte of memory on it and a keyboard with an N with a little apostrophe thing over the top. It was the sole purpose of the memory chip was nothing. It was not electrically connected in the machine at all.
But it had 72 kilobytes.
Yeah, but it increased the memory on paper to 72 kilobytes to circumvent the import tax. Yeah, so
that is pretty ingenious, really, isn't it? It's just like, we just stuck it in there. Yeah, but how did you connect it? No, we didn't. We just stuck it in there, literally stuck it.
And from what I understand, these were leftover chips from something else.
At the end of the day, if you're selling something for £200 or the equivalent in, what was it, pesetas back then, it would have been. Then if you're having to pay an extra £30 in tax because it's 15%, then it picks something up that costs you 20 pence or 50p. Stick that in, and you don't have to pay the extra £30. Yeah, why not?
I think it's. I'm just seeing what the value ratio now is for inflation on the price of the Amstrad. So the Amstrad value now, so it costs £299 for the colour version. That is the equivalent of £974.55 in today's money.
Wow.
That's essentially a 4K TV with a keyboard.
I just found you can buy an Amstrad version of RoboCop Ocean software from Spain for the equivalent of £15.50. The tape.
Oh, well, I've still got my original one that I had when I was 6 years old.
I don't,
and it still works.
I don't know if we actually. I wonder if my dad does actually have my Spectrum. I'd have nothing to connect it to, I think, because nowadays TVs, and I only have a cheap TV. But yeah, I wonder if he does. I very much doubt he'd have any of the software. I don't think.
Well, if you still got it, let me know, because I have a TV in the loft that you could test it out on.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure. So. Would it be looked after? It would have been moved. But yeah, I'll have to ask him and find out if he does still have it. We probably, I can imagine, sold it or something when
or binned it
when it became obsolete. Well, not obsolete, but outdated. And we got a computer. We had a PC from, I think early 90s in our house.
The good old days of Windows 98.
Well, I think it would have been 95. So it would have been mid 90s, because I remember we had. Did we have a 3.1? We might have had a 3.1 PC, but I think the first one I remember was 95, which obviously would have been around 95. And then we had. So but that doesn't matter. That's for another day, right? So we haven't done our usual stuff because we had the brilliant. Won't call him a legend because he doesn't like it, but the legend, Gary Bracey, and so 40 years since Amstrad.
It makes me feel very old.
Does it make you feel old?
It does. I turn 45 next month, so it very does.
I'm afraid to tell you, I turned 46. So I'm afraid we'll only be the same age for a couple of weeks, because I'm the end of the month. I'll be 46.
Commiserations.
Yes. Well, I'll be in London on my birthday, but doing something that was originally meant for my wife and kids. But it should be fun.
Maybe we need a birthday retro shopping trip.
A retro shopping trip. I won't be able to buy anything.
Or even just a gaming trip.
So. Yeah, we'll have to do something because it's coming up to a holiday soon. Anyway, so
guys,
new gaming, focus on gaming name.
Yeah,
yay, exciting. I think everything's been changed. So, updating links or YouTube channel is Focus on Gaming Podcast, I believe. The Facebook is Focus on Gaming Podcast, and such like. We do have as well Focus on Gaming.co.uk. That is up and working now, I believe. The old links should work, but they should just forward onto the same website. So,
So
like,
subscribe.
Right. Yeah, and, like, subscribe, and all that.
Join us next week for episode 42. Yeah.
Bye.
Bye, guys.